Thanks so much for joining us today for this special report. We have our Fashion Week segment, part 2. So excited today. We're going to be talking about redefining the rules of fashion and do a little recap of 2020 Fashion Week. With me today, I have two very special women, experts in the fashion industry. First with us is Anne Cashill. Anne is an independent fashion retail consultant. She's worked with brands like Fossil, Tiffany, Parker, JCPenney, Coach, Nike, Target, you name it. She's actively involved with all things in the fashion industry, and she and I have worked together to pull this part 1, part 2 segment together to really talk about our own kind of September issue here at Omni Talk and Third House around what's happening in the fashion industry and the greater retail industry. Anne, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Anne. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. And next we have Janice Sullivan. Janice has 25 years of experience in the fashion industry, working with brands like DKNY Jeans, Calvin Klein, Eden, serving as president of both of those companies, and most recently as CEO of Rebecca Taylor and Parker. She's also been part of their Ecommerce brands, Recollect by Rebecca Taylor, which we'll be covering today and talking about the resale market as part of this fashion industry trend. And also she serves on the board of the New York City Alliance, overseeing acquisition and growth strategies. Janice, thanks for being with us as well.
Hello.
It's
my pleasure.
It's so great to have you both. Now, I think I cannot wait to hear from both of you what your perspective was. Fashion Week weeks, I should say, as they're kind of trailing all around the world, are kind of coming to a close now. What were some of the big things for you, the big takeaways for both of you this year as we kind of come to the wrap of Fashion Week? And Janice, let's start with you. What did you see this year that really stood out?
I have to say, I think one of the things that I feel was incredibly hard for creatives is managing this whole process through what is hands down the most difficult time that any of us have faced, right? So I was inspired even by the smallest hints of creativity, because I think, I'm quoting Marco Bizzarri, right? It's really hard to be creative when you're depressed, right? It's just like, it's just not an easy thing to, so I was like, hands up for anyone who produced a collection, given, I would say, the overwhelming odds that, their numbers are down, the business is challenged. The worst place to be is in ready to wear, right? Women's ready to wear. Like you can't pick a bottom of the barrel place to be right now. And so these guys, again, they have to get up every morning and believe in themselves. They have to be creative. They have to put it out there. So first of all, I just applauded anyone who could produce a show. I think there was a mixed bag. There were a lot of people who really had to also switch it up. Like if you were a brand that was dedicated to, event wear, right? Mm-hmm. You had to figure it out, right? And so if you were occasion, so for example, an occasion wear brand, there are no occasions going on. So you really had to all of a sudden, switch gears and throw together a collection that represented your brand and also looked refined and comfortable to wear enough at home. So
what were some of the ones that do any come to mind that you can think of, Janice, where you were like, okay, I know we talked in our last segment with Carrie Fryman and Martin Patrick. She was saying Adam Lippis took this textures of fabric mm-hmm. and kind of brought this luxury fabric into something that was a little bit more casual for the first time, which usually he's doing gowns and other things. Were there any things that kind of stood out for you as okay, you're switching it up, you're going from a high-end luxury kind of gown experience and you're taking it into a little more house party instead of gala?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. I think there's a couple of designers that repurposed some of their fabric that was laying around, which I thought, hands off. There are a couple of people who did that. I thought, I always love Ula Johnson. I thought she had, came off with a beautiful show. Maria Chiuri just did an amazing, I thought was a beautiful show, just in Paris for Dior. I thought that was gorgeous. Who else did I like? I like some random people. I thought Sport Max, I don't know if you've seen them out of Italy. I thought they looked fantastic. Yeah. I just, there were quite a few that applied luxury in a more practical way that really impressed me.
Yeah. And what about you? I mean, we had some people doing fully outfit marionettes. We had augmented reality runway shows. How were you, first of all, how are you watching these shows? Were you watching them virtually? How are people kind of consuming this that you saw? And what were some standout things for you, Anne?
Well, I think kind of to Janice's earlier point, I think what happens in this moment is you've got highly creative people who really come up with really unique solutions on how to present their collections. And I think J.W. Anderson did a really interesting concept where it was the show in a box.
Oh, tell us about that. I didn't see that. No,
but it was very clever. Everything came to you in a box, and in the box were the pictures of the show, and then little fabric swatches. He had quotes that were his inspiration for the season, and little handmade nails that you could pin up the quotes. And so it all came together in this little box. I mean, I don't know if it was a little box or a big box. I only saw pictures of it. But to me, that seemed like a very fresh way of presenting your collection. I know that some of the other, I think Etro sent you a cocktail to enjoy, all the little makings for a cocktail. I don't know if it was obviously an Italian cocktail, but for you to enjoy while you watched their show and did the virtual presentation. So I think that there's a lot of creativity that can happen in this moment. I also thought it was really intriguing to hear the way Miuccia Prada and Janice, the new designer at Prada, Raf Simons, sorry, how they came together and collaborated virtually on their collection, and also just the staging of that show and creating. I don't know how many cameras they had, but you could see it in a 3D vocabulary, and then they did a Q&A afterwards, so that they had a few critics that they had dialed in that could ask questions about, the inspiration and how the whole show came together. So I think there were definitely some creative solutions this season that were exciting.
Yeah, I just want to shout out to American designers, because they always have my heart. They're not supported by the industry. They don't get, they don't get big tax breaks, or not even, that's tax breaks is on my mind, but they don't get any stipends. They don't get a lot of government support. So, I have to, again, my hat's off to them. We're scrappy. So when you look at the American shows compared to, what's going on in Europe, I think that the Americans are definitely a scrappy group who really tried their best without a lot of bells and whistles and a lot of support from the industry to put it out there. And that's the other thing I admire over and over about American talent, or designers designing in America. I mean,
well, Janice, I think you bring up a really good point. So one thing that has kind of come to everybody's attention, and I think has been in the news pretty significantly, is, just the cost that's associated with putting on all of these shows, and not just the cost from, the presentation that the artist is putting out, but also the kind of halo of people surrounding these events that are traveling back and forth and staying, in London and Paris and Milan and coming back again, and all of the things that are around that, and really what kind of investment that especially young designers have to make in order to be successful in this industry. Do you feel like, based on these new tactics or these new approaches that people were we're going after to try to get people into their shows or taking part of their shows, whether it's sending a cocktail kit and doing a virtual event or doing smaller scale live events. Do you think that this is a trend that we're going to continue to see in the industry, that people are going to kind of go forward with, one, to save money for the bottom line, but then two, do you think it still has the impact that they need?
Yeah, it's a tough question because, you know, the reason people do shows is because of the impact of the show, right? You have all the press, you have all the key buyers, you have everyone in one place, you know, so the reason that the show exists is really to show the clothes, you know, and to present the brand and the season collection in a way that that matters. But to your point, that's going away, right? So that original concept of the show is definitely going to be morphed. People they can't keep up with the travel. People don't have the money for these big shows. So, you know, you'll definitely see cutbacks, whether, you know, it used to be 4 shows, it'll definitely go to 2 for those who can afford a show. Right. And I think you're going to see also a separation, the big brands with money, you know, that have the ability to keep this pace up and to, you know, and I think, again, like a lot of things that are going on, there's going to be a widening between the haves, you know, and the big money brands, and the big brands will probably get bigger. And then, you know, you've got the medium to small brands, and they struggle to get the attention. And sometimes that produces its own creativity. And, you know, they've got to figure it out. They've got to figure out their own way to speak to their customer. And they have to find new and different ways of making that conversation valuable. And one of the things that I thought that emerged from the showing of collections, you know, particularly in the US, but also as Anne pointed out, it's also was a different way for the designers to speak directly to their buyers and their customers, and really take them in a more intimate fashion through the collection and what it means and what's important and why they chose this fabric. And they could spend a little bit more time intimately taking people through the thought process behind the collection, which everybody appreciates. So I thought, you know, that emerged. So that was quite strong. And I think that will continue. But it, you know, it's legitimately going to be tougher to be able to communicate, you know, in that very impactful way. Right. You know, and that's not to say there are other ways that will emerge to communicate, but that boom of Fashion Week, I think, is going to change.
And any thoughts on this as well, as you kind of process what you saw over the course of the last week?
Yeah, and I think I read an article, and I was just looking back through my notes, but I think I read an article in Women's Wear Daily that said that we're probably never going back to Fashion Week as we once had it. That, this change will bring impact that will last for a long time. And also even J.W. Anderson said, it's not about clothing, this is about survival. Right. And really, to Janice's point, a lot of these young brands are struggling just to make payroll. So the idea of doing an expensive runway production is just, it's off the table in this environment. So I think it's going to be a long coming back to what we knew it was, what it had been in the past, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think, and that brings up for me something that you and I have talked about previously, which is just, you have a new audience coming up, right? You have this Gen Z, this millennial audience, and younger even. And one part of Fashion Week changing is that you mentioned, Anne, like the fashion press is not traveling in the same way, and how you're consuming fashion trends is changing too. And I think we're seeing a lot more influence, or influencers, I would say, who are maybe starting to become this new fashion press. And the influence is being inspired by things they're seeing on the street and how people are buying the things. You know, they may not be looking at magazines. They may be seeing something on Instagram that their favorite, fashion influencer is posting, and now are able to purchase that within that same platform. I'm curious, as you start to see that happening, and then also, you know, brands like you mentioned, Janice, maybe not having the budget to do this big splash anymore, brands starting to go directly to the consumers.
Mhm.
What do you think we can expect there? I mean, is this something that you believe that brands have the power to do? I mean, can they go direct to consumer and still have the biggest impact that they might, you know, if they're going through a wholesaler or they're going through the fashion show process? What do we expect there?
Right. Well, interestingly, the Shanghai Fashion Week, they have been experimenting with Tmall. And I'm sure you're familiar with Tmall, right? It's the Asian version of Amazon. And they have been figuring out how to both live stream the fashion show and at the same time make the product that the consumer is seeing available for immediate purchase. And I know that Burberry had played around with this model. Janice, was that a couple years ago? When
there's a couple that are still doing it. I think Tommy is still doing it, like an immediate.
Yeah, I mean, some of the challenge with this is that, you know, Fashion Week that just happened was presenting spring 2021.
Okay.
So, I mean, the appetite for spring clothing in fall isn't really the same. So I'm not exactly sure. When I was reading about the Shanghai Fashion Week, I'm wondering if they must be showing in-season product, not ahead of season, which is normally what is being shown in London and Paris and in Milan. So, but I think this whole notion of that immediate see it and buy it will definitely be something that will be of the future.
Right. Well, and Janice, I'm curious, Anne touched on Amazon. Amazon launched their luxury platform, Oscar de la Renta being the first partner that's going and selling directly on that platform. What do you think of it? Do you think it's going to take off, or do you think that people are not going to want to buy luxury fashion in that format?
I think La Perle is on there too.
Okay.
Yeah. What do I think? I think Amazon's going to figure it out.
Yeah.
I definitely, I definitely do. Listen, so much have changed. So I'm going to go back to the influencer point of view, because you know what, when you think back about, you would get your influences from magazines. That's how most of the US got, young people would buy, young and old would buy Vogue, and they'd buy all their favorite magazines. They'd look through, they'd mark the pages, they would, and that's all gone away now. Everything that you're influenced by sits in your thumb.
Right.
It's in your phone. You're scrolling through feeds. And so, there's got to be some element of your brand that is speaking directly to this consumer. There's got to be some way to reach your consumer through social media. And a lot of that is through influencers, right? And so they have a following, just like a magazine has a subscription. And, they have a following and the reason people follow them is that they're inspired by their lifestyle or their cooking or the way they dress or whatever. So they're willing to take, and they have a certain credibility, and they're willing to sign up for that credibility. So I think all that has changed, and the way influencers monetize their world, the way direct to consumer and places like Amazon and e-com is going to be huge. And you see it, if it wasn't already, I would say, if it wasn't already such a big shift, this pandemic has just pushed it right over the edge for e-commerce, right? So, I mean, people in their 70s and 80s are shopping online that never even thought to shop online because they're afraid to go into stores. So there was already a seismic shift, but this pandemic just tossed it over the edge. So do I think Amazon luxury is going to figure it out? Absolutely. Whether it's through this app, I don't know if I got the invite. It wouldn't bother me to shop on Amazon.
Okay.
At all. I think it's much more democratic. That's what's going on.
Right. Yeah. We talked about that on our podcast a couple of weeks ago. Like
Mm-hmm.
to me, it's very much democratizing fashion.
Totally.
You don't have to worry about crossing the threshold into that designer's doors. You can experience it online, and especially with some of the technology, the 360-degree views of the products, they're really trying to make an effort, I think, to make that luxury approachable for more people.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And Tmall is a great example of a retailer almost exactly like Amazon, just in a different geographic range, who's absolutely figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually have a really cool thing. It's called some sort of virtual shop where you can be invited to if you want to experience the brand on a more personal level. And they actually have a stylist that would say, Janice, are you interested in making an appointment to try on that J.W. Anderson sweater that you've been looking at? And so it sounds like they've figured out a way to personalize it and also create a little brand moment.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing, you bring up Tmall, and Tmall being part of Alibaba and being a marketplace, we're seeing a lot of brands kind of, now that marketplaces are kind of taking more hold in the US, we're starting to see that emerge beyond just Amazon. Do you, from the perspective of the brands that you guys are working with, have you started to see a shift with them at all as they're thinking about what their brand presence is going to be? Like what percentage of product are they working with somebody like an Amazon Luxury or maybe another marketplace vendor to kind of put out in the digital mall or the digital marketplace? And then what percentage of product or focus or strategy they're going to focus on what their physical presence is going to be, whether that's in a department store or in their own flagship stores themselves?
Janice, I'll just start this and then you chime in. But I think one of the things that we didn't talk about, Anne, is this notion of exclusivity by channel.
Okay.
And I think that is going to be a part of this conversation because just in my past working with Amazon and also trying to keep retailers like Neiman Marcus or Nordstrom's happy,
Mm-hmm.
they don't want to see same for same product in same channels.
Okay.
So I feel like that may be a continued part of what this conversation will look like in how to maintain an omni-channel conversation. And if you're a brand, how do you keep all those channels happy?
Right.
And so some of it is creating some unique assortments by your channel. Does that make sense?
For sure. So Anne, if I'm understanding you right, is this some more of like what we used to see designers doing with, they'd have a blazer that they'd push to, Barney's, they do some special version of the blazer for Barney's, and then another piece that's maybe a little bit different for another department store. Is it something like that, you think, in terms of like unique versions of product that's exclusive to that particular seller, or am I missing that?
I mean, it's some of that. And then
Okay.
in some cases, it's a completely unique SKU that's, completely different.
Okay.
It's been my experience that the merchants at Neiman Marcus want you to feel like what you're getting at Neiman Marcus is unique and special, and not
Right.
something you go home and Google and find on Amazon the minute you get home, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
I think part of that challenge is also on the brand. How do you, especially in this moment where resources and time and talent are part of your expense structure, so how do you create unique assortments by channel? Mm-hmm. But some of it is, how do you keep all channels happy? How do you make sure that you've got a unique reason to go to Neiman Marcus to make your selection? Janice, chime in and tell me if you feel like that's a valid point.
Yeah, I think, again, I think that it's not an easy thing for any brand to figure out and any store to figure out, because, stores are trying to drive their own unique point of view. They're trying to represent brands. And as Anne points out, you need to have a reason to shop either at Neiman's or Nordstrom beyond your shopper card or your loyalty program. And then when Amazon, of course, gets involved in this whole thing, the stakes get even higher.
Right.
And it, you know, I think it's interesting that they started this strategy right now when so many brands are desperate for any kind of exposure and sales, right? Because it's just so difficult, and it does add complications, and it goes back to the designer. You know, they are a lot of times left, the creatives are left to make creative solutions for these issues. You know, do I create, is it a SKU change, or is it a brand new identity, you know, or sorry, brand new design for that particular retailer? Not sure.
Right.
Whatever it is, there has to be a differentiation. You know, it's very hard when you put in one style and you see it in 17 different places with all different offers. I mean, we've all gone through that on Google Shop.
Right.
And you're like trying to parse through, like, is that free shipping? But then are they adding this? You know, is that no return? You know, and you've got to do all these calculations in your head to pick the right way to shop this item. It's just, you know, it's a challenge, and people really have to struggle to figure it out. And to Anne's point, you know, you can end up with a collection this big if you're trying to serve all these different needs.
The other thing, Anne, that in my past in dealing with Amazon and a luxury brand, Michelle Watches, is that Amazon has really complicated algorithms that manage your SKUs and also manage the markdowns cadence.
Okay.
And some of those algorithms that set triggers for when the product is discounted are not even known to their merchant team. Maybe they've sort of straightened out some of this by having some human trigger that notifies the merchant, but it created a ton of challenges. Going into the week before Thanksgiving, they had some sort of algorithm that triggered a 30% discount on our whole product, on some of our key holiday SKUs. And it created a ton of turbulence across our other retail channels. So those are some of the barriers that have kept some designer brands or luxury brands from partnering with them, because some of the behaviors haven't been traditional from a department store wholesale channel relationship.
It feels really hopeless. I'm really feeling for the brands and designers here, because I think they, you know, on one hand, you're best off. You've always been best off if you can go and sell directly to your customer and not have to worry about, you know, going through other parties, but that's not realistic. And especially now, as you both are really keying in on, is that, you know, you can't avoid e-commerce either. You can't avoid being part of those marketplaces. And one other element that we haven't talked about yet is, you know, expanding your collection, especially as a designer, into some of the other outlets that you might not have considered before. And you were bringing up yesterday just how you know, a designer may never have thought of selling on Amazon or selling it with Walmart or with Target, but especially as we get, you know, into potentially a second wave of this pandemic coming this fall, you know, now are these pandemic proof retailers that are essential businesses that are opening because they sell, you know, a multitude of other goods. Now I think designers, it sounds like, have this element to consider too. If you want to keep the doors open, you want to keep people shopping your product, it's either online marketplace or maybe considering or reconsidering a partnership that you never have thought of before. Have you seen that happening too, either one of you?
Janice, do you want to take it?
Just say the last piece again, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I guess I'm just curious, are you seeing either designers or brands themselves kind of explore partnerships that maybe 2 years ago they would have said, absolutely not, this will diminish my brand, I'm not going to even consider it. And now they're thinking like, I have to open it up. That has to be something that on my consideration set.
Listen, you do struggle with that concept every single day. You know, as somebody who runs a brand, because, you know, again, you've got to meet minimums for cuts overseas. You know, there's a whole host of things that you on top of just figuring out the distribution, you also have to figure out the production. And, you know, going back to that piece where, you know, doing, an exclusive for Nordstrom or a Neiman's or a Saks or whatever, you know, again, they could, you know, with their reduced store capacity, they can only commit to anywhere from 60 to 180 pieces, and your minimum at the factory is 300, you know, so it's just, you've got a whole host of things that you're up against. So yes, of course, you're constantly making trade-offs and considerations. If I open X, what will happen to Y? Is it, you know, and so as, you know, if you're a strong brand with a strong following and a big D2C component that you could drive, you're definitely pulling back from some of your wholesale partners that are definitely not delivering the best in class for your product. If you're not as strong as a brand, sometimes you have to make those concessions, particularly if you have huge financial pressures, you know, and most brands are under a lot of huge financial pressures, you know, and so as an executive, you sit there and say, well, I could turn my nose up at this order, which would keep the brand strong for a longer time, or I could let 3 people go. And literally, you know, and that's small, right? That's a small consideration.
Right.
People are having these conversations and considerations probably daily and thinking about the long-term health of their brand, what they need to do to survive or stay alive, and the concessions that they need to be able to do that. I would say that's probably your biggest job as somebody who's running, you know, at least the sales of a brand, if not the brand itself. And it's heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. It's not an these are not easy decisions.
And Janice, just adding to that, because this was a recent experience that both Janice and I went through, is also even for a small brand to maintain your own direct-to-consumer business and to have an online business, it can be really challenging. You have to build photo assets. You have to have monthly updates to the website. You have to have a whole team of people that manage the website. And unless your volume hits a certain threshold as a young designer, it may be impossible for you to consider maintaining your own website. And I know, you know, brand or companies like Shopify have made it somewhat easier to build your own website, but still you have to create all the photo assets, have a team member who's constantly updating and maintaining it. And then you're also up against, you know, Bloomingdale's and Saks and all of the department stores running friends and family promotions all the time.
Right.
So then you're competing against your other channels of distribution. So it's channel of distribution is a very challenging topic for an emerging young designer and also an established brand.
Right. And it also used to be that you would work with a brand on a co-op budget and they would help market your brand. And it used to be in, you know, their seasonal catalogs and drops, you know, so you know, but now that co-op money is going to their direct to consumer. So you're basically giving them money to bid against your own brand.
Wow.
When, you know, and so you're basically literally upping the stakes on your own brand name so that you could appear first in Google Shop.
Right.
So it's just fascinating, you know, so, you know, it's become very complicated. And it goes back to what you were saying about the democratization of fashion. You know, it's much more open than it was in the past. And it's that much more complicated because you have to figure all this all out.
Well, and one other trend that we're seeing too is this move towards buying less too, and buying higher quality pieces, or, you know, in a lot of cases, instead of, I think this up and coming demographic, this Gen Z audience, they don't have the budgets that what they usually would put more towards like a fast fashion kind of trend piece. Now we're seeing a shift toward more upcycled other kind of products. And I know, Janice, you worked on Recollect by Rebecca Taylor. What are brands doing to kind of embrace this, I guess, or what is all involved in a brand thinking about adding in some sort of either resale component, maintaining their brand in the resale market, thinking about the types of products, like what all goes into a brand considering kind of this new trend?
Yeah, I would say when I looked at the idea, first of all, I saw the idea at Eileen Fisher.
Okay.
Who I happen to think she just, does amazing things. And really, I would say it was a copycat, right? So I thought wow, that's really brilliant, right? And could a brand like Rebecca Taylor, for example, do something like this? Eileen Fisher kind of built her persona and her brand on a certain type of brand values. Mm-hmm. And would that work at Rebecca Taylor? And so what I thought about were women like me. Maybe I would wear something once or twice if I mm-hmm. Spent money on a beautiful dress. And then I thought, well, I'm not going to do a stoop sale in Brooklyn on a Saturday afternoon. It's just not who I am. I'm also not going to schlep around to resale shops or those types of things. It just wasn't what I would do. And I had a lot of customers that were like me, right? But I knew that there was a way to find a second home for this dress or a second life for this dress. So, what I thought about was, how could I involve the consumer mm-hmm. in this solution to this issue? And I know that she really wants to be involved in upcycling or re-commerce. Mm-hmm. And so how can I incentivize her to participate in this program? So I started with the customer and then really thought about, the product is beautifully made, so you have to start out with a product that's well made, right? Because it's got to last, and then, and when you think about occasion wear, you wear it to several occasions and then nowadays you retire it. Mm-hmm. So here was a way to give it a second life and then to bring that solution to open up the brand, which is an aspirational brand, to a whole new set of consumers that maybe would have liked to buy it but couldn't afford it.
Right.
So they could come to the brand and try it in a different way. So, it had an appeal for a younger customer or a customer whose budget. I met many customers who said, you know what, it was great when I was younger, before I had kids, I could spend the money on myself, but now I'm spending it on private clothes, I'm spending it on this and that, and I just can't feed my fashion habit, right, what I used to have. So I love that you did this, right? So it was a win on a lot of levels in really capturing new customers or customers that had left the brand to come back to the brand. So, I think a lot of brands should think hard about this space because I think a lot of them are afraid of it. I think they fear it's going to affect their full price business.
Okay.
But you know what? You can't be afraid. You've got to try things. And, I think that once you overcome that initial fear, it opened up so many doors. I think it has this, opportunity to create business in a new way, which is not easy nowadays.
And I also think, Janice, too, I think the customer is in a new place, just mm-hmm. with their willingness with the Real or with Rent the Runway, and that idea of using gently worn clothes and buying them is also a consumer mindset change, yeah. Right?
And not all consumers. I feel like that, some consumers aren't at all concerned about sustainability. It's like the fast food of fashion customers. They just, and generally they don't invest a lot of thinking in their clothes. Clothes are, have a purpose. The purpose is to cover themselves. They're not invested in the whole process. And so it's a different type of customer that you're talking about that is interested, I think, sometimes in sustainability.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of times, especially in times like now where I think we're facing a potentially serious economic situation where sustainability is one of somebody's values, but then it also comes down to what the cost is involved in that. And, not everybody can afford to do the sustainable options. Sometimes it's going to come down to
Absolutely.
price and preparing for that kind of market too. I'm curious, as you are thinking about, both of you, kind of what the future looks like. We talked about the economy, we talked about Fashion Week changing, the industry changing to kind of accommodate things that have forced it forward because of the pandemic. What does the future of the fashion industry look like to each of you? And maybe we'll start with you on this one.
Gosh, I think it's going to be really an interesting future. Carrie, who we spoke with a few weeks ago at Martin Patrick, which is a specialty store in Minneapolis, said that their whole mentality is buying tighter, buying narrower, not as deep as they might have purchased a year ago. And so I think what will happen is, and then on the flip side of that, she said, as she went back to vendors and brands to chase product, they didn't have it, which is also a huge change. Janice, and I know that we've really trained the industry to know that we'll have on hand inventory. So I think it's going to really, it will be a very different shopping experience. I think the consumer's going to have to, when they see something they love, they're going to have to buy it, because they might not have that comfort of knowing that they'll be able to find it somewhere else or come back a couple weeks later and get it. So I think the net, and Anne, you touched on this, is going to be really hard to figure out, just because I do believe that there's going to be an economic situation that's going to force very different habits as far as shopping. And I think Q4 is going to be very interesting to see what happens with holiday and what's the appetite for discretionary spending.
Right. What about you, Janice?
I'm quite apocalyptic. I really do. I do think that, right now it's mid-sized brands were getting squeezed. We're like in an untenable situation. You could not keep it up. Right. And I read the book, The Future of Retail by Doug Stevens, which is an amazing book. I think the guy's an amazing prophet. And I really stand by, the wholesale model is broken. It is very broken, particularly the department store. I'm not talking specialty store now. I'm talking about the department store. It's very broken. The traditional wholesale, where the buyers come in and buy from brands a small segment of their collection, and hope that putting it out there, 6-7 months later, the consumer's going to come and like what they bought or like what they put online. And I think ultimately, I think DTC will be the way to go. I think almost everyone's going to have a DTC play, whether they're running that DTC through wholesale, like in the lease model, and they're really driving the success of their brands in a Nordstrom, in an Neiman's, whatever, or. And I think we're going to, I think we're definitely overstored. There's going to be a big clean out of who is left standing. Right. And you're going to see, I think, highly specialized retail will emerge, very specialized retail, so that when you're going for, and highly edited retail will emerge. So I think consumers are starved for time. They don't want to go into, like right now, when you put in refrigerator in Amazon, you have 1,000-page results. When you go into those big box stores, you look for a refrigerator. Imagine you go and, someone's curated the top 5 refrigerators for you. Right. They've done all the work. So again, these highly curated, specific environments where you can go and really have, I would say, much more, the exact opposite of what we've had, right? You have a much more interactive conversations with specialists and stylists, and it's I would say just more highly targeted, more specific,
more personalized.
Yeah, I'm curious what you both think. I mean, because to me, that sounds like this concept that we've been talking about quite a bit, which is like the influencer as the retailer. And like you're saying, Janice, very, you have a go-to person who you trust and you look to kind of edit down that collection for you. Is there anybody now that stands out to either of you who might be some of those people who start to emerge as like the go-tos for fashion or for that people will be going to, I guess, to kind of have that called down list?
I guess one of the things that immediately comes to my mind, and she's not so much an influencer as much as a celebrity, and she kind of did it ahead of everyone else, but Gwyneth Paltrow with Goop.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I feel like she, to Janice's point, like if you want to sort of understand what are the best sunscreens,
mm-hmm.
at least for me, sometimes I'll go to her site to go like, because I think some of the things that she values is being natural, having the product, having integrity and all of that. So I can go there and at least see her point of view. I don't know. Are you thinking about influencers like something Navy?
Could be. I mean, I was just more curious if there's anybody that comes top of mind. Like I believe that what Janice is talking about is very near in our future. And so just curious who those people might be, if it's the magazine.
I know this is random and probably counterintuitive, but I really think the small specialty store in your little town, I think they've been an overlooked segment. Mm-hmm. I think that these women or men who run they know their customer.
Mm-hmm.
They service that customer day in, day out. They know when their daughter's getting married, when they're, I think things in small towns, they can be the influencers, mm-hmm. and they can be, and they could, reemerge. I almost feel like reemerge as something more special, more one-on-one. I always feel like I'm rooting for the underdog with the specialty store, because I think for a while people did go to department stores, but there's I think there'll be a revitalization of downtown. I think, especially now, well, you see this trend of people moving to the suburbs, but these small little stores in these tiny towns, mm-hmm. Where they're known. Now, I think there is an opportunity now to open stores. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I think what will emerge from this is a different type of retail. And going back to it, it'll be much more highly specialized. And I think it's, how do you empower those small stores? How do you get them to a better place? Right. How do you get them so that they can offer things to their customers? I think that's an interesting question there.
And I do think, Anne, to your point, I do think I agree 100% with what Janice said. I have a few specialty stores that I have been a loyalist to, and I love that they edit for me and that mm-hmm. they kind of know me and they've pulled things aside. But I do think that the influencer in the future will have a role to play because, as Janice mentioned, the magazines are continuing to get smaller and smaller and less relevant. So I do believe, as Janice said, between your Instagram feed and looking at how people are putting outfits together is still going to be a really highly viewed place for brands to get themselves out there. And I think brands will have to have relationships with influencers, and how that influencer either directs that consumer looking at their feed to either go to Nordstrom's or go to a specialty store. I think that actual transaction and how that path looks like is going to be something that's going to be yet to be determined.
Right. Or how technology will evolve too, to get mm-hmm. them that product, because it might not be at a store. It might be in that Instagram influencers feed right then and there. And they're, I think, you both bring up the question of like, what the relationships with the brands are and what technologies can evolve to support those brands getting their products, drop shipped or in the hands of someone without having to, go through another retailer to do that.
Because, and too, the other thing that gets very expensive for small brands, as we've been talking about, is these, to get a high profile influencer to post on your product is super expensive.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the DTC, it's, people are like, oh, we have to go DTC, but they think like magic, but no, you have to acquire customer, you have to do, there's so much around building that DTC business, and every day the stakes get higher, particularly as luxury gets involved in DTC and they start to drive that, they drive all the costs up. So it's much harder than you think.
Right.
And, I think it's not an easy proposition, and it gets harder because customer expectations are, I want free returns. I want it tomorrow. And I think that's also needs a bit of a reckoning. I don't think you have to be all things to all people at once as a brand. I think you just have to, be sympathetic. I want to say use your weaknesses as your strength as a small brand, and really try hard to push on the more unique and creative elements of your brand, rather than trying to compete with everyone on every front.
Right. So that makes complete sense. Well, before we let you go, I have a question for each of you as my own personal fashion influencers and experts on this program. As you looked at fall fashion and winter fashion as we go into here, what one piece would you both invest in for this season that we have ahead based on what you've seen? Is it going to be all athleisure wear? Is there any fun? What is it? Janice, we'll start with you. What's the one piece you'd invest in this fall or winter season?
If I'm going to invest in something, it's not going to be athleisure. It's just not. I mean, I'm a runner. I run every day. I was in cross country, and I always thought of workout clothes should not be worn outside my home, or for the event that you're wearing it to, whether it be a race or whatever. But maybe that's because I grew up as an athlete. So I have my own perspective on that, but it definitely wouldn't be athleisure. I also am not voting for swanning around my house in high heels and an event dress. It's neither one. What I think I'm looking for is a piece that's emotional and creative. And that feels really beautiful. That makes me feel beautiful when I wear it. So again, it's applying some of the luxury touches to something that feels, that just makes me feel beautiful when I put it on. And that doesn't have to be dress up, or it doesn't have to be athleisure. It's just something that feels good tactically, like from a tactile point of view, yet makes me feel beautiful. And I think that's what women want. They want great fit. They want to feel beautiful, whether they're wearing running gear or not. And they want something that inspires them.
I love it, Janice. And what about you?
Well, I'm possibly a little bit more practical than my friend Janice. But I bought a couple things for fall, one being a pair of joggers.
Okay.
I had, so I kind of felt like that was a new update to my legging. And I don't really sport around wearing my leggings, Janice, outside of the house. But
thank God.
But
I'm so tired of seeing people's leggings outside the home. I just really am.
And then I have bought a couple of really two gorgeous, amazing cashmere sweaters that I think will be very practical for my at-home work life. And gorgeous colors. They're new colors, but they're also yummy, keep me warm and cozy sweaters. So that seems a little more practical than something. They maybe make me feel beautiful, Janice, but.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for being a part of this conversation, for sharing your expertise. If people want to follow your work or get in touch with either of you, what's the best way for them to stay up to date with what you're working on? Janice, maybe we'll start with you.
So I'm starting a new role in acquisitions. So I'm starting with a company called NYC Alliance, a really quietly incredible company that has done a really great job in the last couple of years of growing their company. And now they're looking to make acquisitions in the contemporary space.
Okay.
And they're looking for, small brands. So soon to come, I'll be at NYC Alliance, and you can just follow my email, which is you'll put on your site, but I don't have to say it here. But
sure.
So until then, that's where I'll be.
Awesome. And what about you?
And LinkedIn is just the best way to reach me.
Oh, LinkedIn too. Sorry, LinkedIn.
Perfect. Janice, Sullivan, and Cashill, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you all for joining us. And again, we'll be posting the recap of this conversation on our social platforms to come. So thanks so much for joining us, and have a great day.